So my first question, the Chinese are obviously on everybody's mind. There seemed to be more buzz a year ago about their involvement. What are you seeing today, and how deep is that buyer pool? Emily?
Well, the Chinese that I see more are parents buying for children, so I'm seeing more of the $3 million and below.
Mm-hmm. Hung, what are you seeing today as far as Greenland's projects, and how many Chinese buyers are they attracting?
So now I come from Greenland, USA. We have two projects. One project in downtown Brooklyn and another project in downtown LA. So you know that China is the second largest economy. Now the more and more people have strong, becoming the more and more wealthy. So they have more the opportunity, have more eager for the investment in overseas, and also they want to stress education. They send more and more children to study in USA and in overseas.
And is Brooklyn a familiar brand for the Chinese?
Yeah, so we are marketing 551 Beare to all buyers, including China. But as you know, we are one developer in China. We have the big influence of the branding, and more customers can follow us to go overseas to buy units.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And are you finding that foreign buyers in general what are the price points that Chinese are typically looking at?
So I think it's difficult to say. So some buyers maybe buy for their children. Maybe they are interested in the studio. And some buyers, they have big business in New York. They want to large room, maybe with a good terrace, with good view. Maybe the approximately 2 million. And if a studio or one bedroom, that's the 1 million. I think that's this price level. I don't know. So for our project, that's like this. Yeah.
What countries could possibly deliver the next wave of foreign buyers? Raphael and Elizabeth, you mentioned Indian buyers. That seems worth discussing since that's a 1 billion person buyer pool. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, obviously after China, I think just quickly to the China comment, you may see a different economy in China, but the Chinese are still buying here. It's a country of over 1 billion people. There's still an enormous amount of wealth. So I 100% think India, I think also Singapore, which has a very large Indian population, it's a very multifaceted country, are two really incredible emerging markets. I think India, especially you've seen some, in terms of natural resources and the mining and steel, have some very large billionaires. So I think you're starting to see that trickle down, and it's getting a little bit easier to get your money out of India. So we've had a huge focus on that for a while with wealth managers. We've actually gone back and forth to India and also to Singapore to work with the India desk of some of the banks, because that seems to be the next wave coming in. Although I don't think the Chinese are done. I think we always have, maybe in the 80s with the first original Trump Tower, it was the Greeks, and then you had the Argentines and the Russians. They're always coming. There's always a new wave coming, but the previous waves are still around, so we can't forget about them.
I thought it's interesting that Indian millionaires worth $30 million are growing at a faster rate than Chinese millionaires, and the economy is also growing faster in India. What are kind of the profiles of the buyers you're seeing? What are the backgrounds?
I think a lot of it is like the original Chinese buyers. It's a little bit harder. I think it's about $250,000 you can bring out every X amount of months. So it takes a little bit longer and the price points are lower. But we're seeing a lot of families buy $1 to sort of $3 million apartments, especially in the high 20s and the mid 30s for their kids. So at that price point for a condo, it's going to be a small 1-bedroom probably. But they see it as a really good place to park their money. I think around, especially that whole tower section, I would say like 28th Street to 42nd has been very popular for us. But there's also a high appetite for risk, which I think has been very interesting. We have a lot of people really interested in high cap rates in emerging markets. So looking in what is called, whether you call it Williamsburg or Bushwick, that whole area, because I'd like to see some great appreciation in 3, 5, 7 years.
Mm-hmm. And Raphael, what are you seeing?
Pretty much the same thing. I think it's important to note that India is the largest democracy in the world, right? And because of the previous English colonial rule, English is widely spoken. There are a lot of Indian diaspora here in the U.S., and it just makes sense with their burgeoning upper middle class that eventually they're going to come here in larger numbers than they have already.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've heard is that they typically gravitate towards London just because of the colonial rule history. Are you seeing that as a factor that's pulling them away from New York, or, in terms of London, you're seeing higher taxes now? Is that a disincentive at all?
London, I think, is prohibitively expensive for somebody who wants to spend $1 to $3 million, let's say. I don't think you get very much. I think you actually get a lot more here. So I'm not really concerned about London taking that market share. Maybe for the ultra high end, it's probably biting into New York's ultra high end as far as Indians go. But sub 3 million, I don't think so.
Elizabeth, you talked a little bit about Brazil, obviously having some tough times between their president being impeached, the Zika virus, the bad economy, and everything else. What are you seeing as far as activity?
So it's interesting. I actually thought we'd see a slowdown within the Brazilian community. But it's funny, actually, I've realized recently we sort of have an uptick of some Brazilians selling. So I thought, oh, they want to dump the asset and have liquidity. But it turns out they're actually buying bigger properties with the money. So I was sort of surprised by that. I think it also has to go back when you say you're a Brazilian buyer. Is your Brazilian buyer someone who is Brazilian born and lives here, or are they someone who is Brazilian and lives in São Paulo and comes here for 1 month a year? So I think you have to make that differentiation. But again, I mean, listen, I'm glad I'm not in Brazil this last 2 weeks. It's been a really rough time for their government and their economy, but there's still a lot of money there. Not as much as there once was, but there is some activity, and I think some people are looking to have a little bit more cash. And especially with the changing, I think you saw this in Argentina and Chile, when those governments changed, what a great opportunity to sort of take some of that money out and continue to park it here. So they know our currency is not going to get completely destabilized, and I think that actually may drive some more South American buyers to come to New York.
Mm-hmm. One other group you mentioned was Uzbekistan. I probably couldn't locate Uzbekistan on a map, but what is the deal there?
Well, a lot of oil money. Obviously, oil, the barrel oil is fluctuating up and down, but there's still cash reserves there. So I'm still seeing, I think, increasingly, and probably as Raphael mentioned, the London market has just become cost prohibitive. I mean, for $1 million, you're going to live 2 hours away in a tiny village somewhere. So I think at this point, we're starting to see more Middle Eastern oil money coming in. And I think that also goes to Kazakhstan as well. I mean, it's a country no one really talks about, but there's incredible money there. And there's some real interest. Obviously, there's been some high-profile talk of people here sort of laundering a little bit of money. But there are also normal Kazakhstan people who have a lot of cash buying condos. So I'm not saying they're going to overtake the real estate market in New York, but it is a segment of the world that I think we're just starting to realize has a bigger purchasing power in New York.
Mm-hmm. And how about closely aligned group Russians? Is that just not happening today on the high end? Are you seeing people even looking, or what's the overall sense there?
There have actually been a couple of recent really big trades from Russian buyers. So I think that they're still around to some extent. Mm-hmm. I think the key thing to remember is that at any price point, the days of there being a lot of people who are willing to overpay for property are sort of behind us.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that we talked earlier. So in your opinion, and you have a unit for sale at 157 right now, that's the granddaddy of Billionaires Row. Maybe it doesn't apply to this specific property, but you were talking about how you think there's sort of a price discovery happening right now across the market, and maybe 5 to 15% off is what's going to, given that there's slower activity, going to pull people back in. Is that what you think is going to take for there to be more activity at different price points?
I do, and that's kind of what happened in 2010 and 2011. Prices dropped between 20 and 30% on average, depending on the property or apartment, and people who were on the sidelines started to jump back in. That was my personal experience, at least.
And is that 1 to 3 million, or that's above 3 million?
That was at all price points.
All price points?
Because then on September 15, '08, everything froze completely. There were no transactions from my standpoint until about May, June of '09. And then by 2010, once sellers had adjusted to the new reality and prices came down almost 30%, people started buying again. I don't think prices will fall that much this time. I don't think we're facing another Lehman situation. But I do think we're probably undergoing a 5 to 15% reset, to your point.
So where are we in that cycle? Is it just at the point where deals are getting struck at those prices, or it's already a reality that's been happening for a month or two? Or?
I think it's already happening. I kind of noticed things shift in June of last year. So I think we're coming up on 1 year of the new reality, actually. And it's going to take a while to work through all the inventory that we have in the pipeline. We got 15,000 apartments between now and the next 24 months, and that's like a 6 or 7 year supply. We'd rather have a 3-year supply. That's probably healthier, and it's going to take a while to work through all this inventory.
It seems like it's always a confusing thing, especially with new development, because by the time it closes, it's 3 years after the contract was signed or 2 years after. So it's really hard to get a sense of that.
Yeah, and the deals that are being struck now where transfer tax is being erased or people are getting a 5% discount from the Schedule A, we're not going to really see those deals recorded for a while. So.
So as far as Compass goes, obviously you're known for giving brokers the advantage when it comes to tech and data-driven decision-making. Does any of that touch on foreign buyers and where buyers are coming from?
Yes. Well, first, I'd say we do focus on foreign buyers, and I'll share how specifically. But I think it's for the most part over or sensationalized. There's much more foreign demand domestically outside of New York City than there is outside of the country, right? And so we at Compass, we're focused on building the largest owned brokerage network within the country. So Aspen, Miami, DC, Boston, LA, from Beverly Hills to Santa Barbara, Montecito, ultimately to San Francisco. We think there's a greater differentiation to bring domestic reach than international reach. On the international side, you can go to the agent level, you can go to the brokerage firm affiliation level, and then you can go to auction houses. I personally believe that auction houses do not bring buyers. I don't conceptually understand how someone could go to an auction house in Hong Kong and look through 1,000 properties. I just don't understand how that would actually happen to find the property. I think brokers and agents bring buyers, not auction houses or brokerage firms. So what we did is we identified the world's 20 wealthiest cities per The Economist, and then identified the top agents in each one of those markets, and then email and call them directly to encourage them to bring their buyers.
How about you, Elizabeth or Raphael? Do you see Stribling has an association with Savills, right?
Savills, yeah.
Savills. And Raphael Element has an affiliation with Knight Frank. Do you see that producing business on the ground?
I do. I mean, I think it's, again, any affiliation you have is how much effort you put into it, right? So I think that I agree about brokerage houses. It's great to, have the top brokers in every city, and I agree domestically. I think it should be a huge part of your business is, having that, your personal network and your corporate network. I think that it's good for yourself and good for the company. Yeah, it brings a lot of business, but I, as an owner, put a lot of effort into that. So on an annual basis, you'll find me in Singapore, or you'll find me in Hong Kong, London. I think I'm going to be going to Seoul this year, Abu Dhabi, to speak about the company and offerings in New York. So, but it can't just be for surface. You actually have to put something into it. So that has actually caused us to get a lot of business. So, but again, it's also taking their tools and our tools and co-branding it, whether it be the Knight Frank, wealth report for Douglas Elliman, or for me, the Savills 12-city report. It's a lot. It's very time consuming to do, but if you it's not going to happen overnight, but if you really put the effort in, you will see buyers coming, and we get buyers, on a daily basis from all over.
Is it tough for those agreements to have teeth to them? I mean, are they more marketing things at the end of the day? And what are the kind of the referral fees? How does that kind of work as far as divvying up the pie if somebody from, across the Atlantic sends a buyer over to New York?
I think, in terms of referral fees, it just depends on the agreement I have with anyone. I'm happy to pay you a referral for a good buyer. I'm not going to say no. You know, obviously, I want to have the best business possible, and I want to help your buyers, and so your buyers will come back to you and come back to me. Ultimately, it's a referral business. I think that there are some probably affiliations out there that are just for marketing purposes and probably don't have much teeth, but I think there are a lot of great companies in New York who have really good affiliations. I think a lot of us on this panel have them, but they're all ones we actually put effort into so they deliver. So if you can't just say, oh, I have this affiliation, and when your seller says to you, or whoever it is, well, what does it do? And you're just like, oh, I don't know, it's just someone in Spain. You have to be able to say, I have concrete examples, right? Like last week, blah, blah, blah in Oman sent me this buyer, and this is what they're looking for. They sent me this, and I think it'll give you a sort of better profile of the global buyer, and you can see you have a better sort of network for your newsletter, et cetera, to send out. So it can't just be window dressing, but it's up to you as a broker and a corporate person to really, hit the pavement for it.
Mm-hmm. And Emily, as far as your networking internationally, how do you kind of see building business in other countries? I know you have contacts in Hong Kong and London, South Africa. Is it like hitting up the wealth managers first? Is it hitting up the lawyers? Is it hitting up family and friends? Who are the best gatekeepers to, if there's a broker out there who doesn't do any international business, where would you start?
Well, I would say almost 100% of my business is referral. And I'm fortunate enough to come from an international family where I have people in many countries around the world. So those are the relationships that I build upon, because for me it's very personal, mm-hmm. and people that know me personally, and that's mm-hmm. How I built my business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just want to add, aside from with our situation with Knight Frank, which is an exclusive partnership, not only do they send buyers across the pond and from Asia, but it's incredibly helpful, at least to me, in securing listing assignments. To Robert's point, sellers are particularly hung up on that sort of like unicorn foreign buyer who's going to come and give them their ask or above. And if you don't have any kind of international affiliation, I think it's tough when you're competing against agents who do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can I just add just really quickly? I think that's a really great point. I think for all the agents out there, I get the first thing when someone says they want to list their house, well, where are you going? And when they say, I'm going to Colorado, you're leaving money on the table. There's such a great opportunity for you there. So I think it's really important you try to capitalize on that. And too many people don't take that opportunity, and you can build such great business from that. So I just want to highlight that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of other U.S. cities that are attracting foreign buyers, Robert, you have a pretty big footprint nationally already. What are you seeing in other markets? Is LA outpacing New York as far as attracting foreign buyers, for example?
LA is active, Miami much less so. The developers in Miami are very interested in us because we have a domestic network. Mm-hmm. So I'd say of the regions we're in, it's LA, New York, and Boston for what Emily brought up earlier, because a lot of people from China or Singapore have kids there, and they don't want them to be in the college. They want them to have their own home.
Right.
Yeah.
And gang, how about in LA? Greenland has a large project there, Metropolis. What percentage of the buyers are coming from China there, and how does that compare to Atlantic Yards, the Pacific Park project?
So our project, our is different from New York market. Our just is a recreation of capital. So a lot of buyers from China who are interested in artists and who want to have a leisure life. So they want to buy in LA. They are interested in LA. But New York, who that's a businessman, successful businessman, and also who are talent. The buyer want to buy in New York. Mm-hmm. And the difference, I think, from China, that's also the regional difference. The south of China, most of South China are interested in LA, and the north of China are most interested in New York.
Thank you. I have a question for the brokers. So you're given a $75 million exclusive. That's great, right? The only catch is it's in a Trump building. So do you mention Trump in the marketing, and how are foreign buyers responding to the election?
Pass.
I have to pass too.
So that means you're not going to mention it. Easier question. Are you finding that specific groups of foreign buyers are more worried about the presidential election than other groups, or is there any difference among foreign groups that are paying closer attention than others?
I think that when I speak to people overseas, and they're curious, they're all very curious about it and fascinated. But I don't know that they're concerned because, if they're not here, if they're investing money here, I don't think New York really has to rely too much on who the president is. New York is almost, a city, a global city unto itself, very much like London or Hong Kong. Almost separate from the rest of the country.
I agree with Emily, and anybody who's sophisticated is going to probably understand whether they're foreign or domestic, that at the end of the day, I don't think it makes a huge difference between the two candidates that we have on the table right now. I don't see how either changes anything for you as a foreign investor or a buyer, really.
I think this happens every election, whether it be this one. This is foreigners especially. I'm fascinated by this election. It's really interesting, isn't it? But I think that it's a really good excuse. Especially if you're sitting on the sidelines and you don't know what to do. I think saying, "Oh, I want to see who the president is it's not going to. Prices aren't going to drop tremendously or go up. New York's still a city with water around it. I think we have to remember that, and we're a megalopolis that has a finite amount that can be built.
So you might see an uptick in David Duke supporters, or I won't go there, buying in Trump buildings. So also locally, in terms of de Blasio, people were so scared when he first took office that there were going to be huge tax increases and development would be stymied. Maybe some of the policy changes down the road will have some of that effect, but are you hearing anything from foreign buyers about de Blasio, and what's your general opinion about how he's affected the residential market? Nothing too bad then. It's not scuttling any deals, I guess. So let's look at some other areas of the city as well. Midtown obviously is a huge area for foreign buyers. Raphael, you have a project at 157. Robert, you're doing a project, A.B. Rosen's project on 53rd. Elizabeth, you're doing a project on East 57th Street, Eastern Billionaires Row. How do you see your projects as differentiating from all the other inventory there? And what percentage of foreign buyers would you expect at those projects?
Well, I love our project, 252 East 57th. It's further east. It's a Skidmore Merrill Owens building. It's pretty incredible. Everyone, obviously, we all have our features that make us different. Although I've seen the pickup in the demand in that sales office is, in the last month is just unbelievable. But it's very well priced, comparatively to we're on between 2nd and 3rd Avenue, and you're getting an incredible building at a different price point. In terms of foreigners, I think it's a new development row. So, of course, you're going to get a lot of them. But I still think it goes back to, the Jonathan Miller versus, I didn't hear the comment by one of Mr. Zeckendorf today, but I still think that you're getting a higher than normal amount of foreigners coming to, than a normal for a resale at these buildings, because it's just so much easier. Even when you buy a resale condo, it's fairly invasive, that package. So buying in the new development is really the easiest way of doing it, and a very easy way especially for very wealthy people, to dip their toe into the New York market.
I did a deal in that building. They were foreigners, but from New Jersey.
Oh. I have no comment. My wife is from New Jersey, so I no longer comment on it. It's wonderful because she's from there.
And 157 is 3/4 foreign buyers, right?
That's what they say. It's kind of hard to figure out with all the LLCs, though.
Fair enough. So, and good point bringing that up. With the Treasury Department rules, are you seeing that affect buyers on the ground? Are you seeing people worried about that? Or what advice are you giving to people if and when they ask about that?
The main concern that I've heard from people is I think that they're nervous about getting onto the IRS's radar because they're only staying here for a couple of weeks a year, and they don't want to be taxed as U.S. citizens or taxed as New York City residents or New York State residents. So I'm pretty sure that can't happen, that information can't necessarily be shared for those purposes, but that seems to be a concern from a few people I've heard from.
I think that's sort of been a long-standing concern, that people who are buying here that are foreign could be taxed for their income and that sort of thing. And I guess one of the major loopholes of the Treasury Department rules is that it doesn't apply to wire transfers, which, you know, that's a huge loophole. But you'd have to imagine long-term, you know, given the Panama Papers leak and WikiLeaks and Treasury rules, that there's more transparency sort of coming to the market. So I just wonder if that's something that people will be worried about.
I think the number of people that are actually buying apartments with you know, misappropriated funds or ill-gotten funds is so tiny. I think it's a fraction.
Yeah.
Even at 157, it's probably like 1% or less. So I think that's sort of overblown in a way.
And as far as Brooklyn, are you guys selling apartments there as well? And are you seeing foreigners go there? What areas specifically would be most attractive?
I mean, the only foreigners that I see, I've had clients that moved here from London, and they like Brooklyn. They like Brooklyn Heights and Park Slope and Carroll Gardens because they like the feel, the townhouse feel. So from that point of view, those are my personal experience with foreign.
I've also seen the French. You're often in, my mother spends a lot of time in France, and often when something is cool, you say très Brooklyn. So it's very sort of going through that whole area. But then when they come to New York, I mean, if you ever are walking in Brooklyn, especially along by the River Cafe, I mean, you will hear a lot of French and other European languages spoken. So we're seeing more demand, I think, because it's so cool and in movies and all these things that people, when they buy a pied-à-terre, they want to be a part of that, you know, hip generation, perhaps, is the silliest way to put it. But there is a desire for it.
And you guys are also marketing the Sharif El Gamal project in Lower Manhattan. Is that, how far along is that in terms of sales?
Can you repeat the question?
What's that? Oh, sorry, the Sharif El Gamal project, the Park Place project, the
I mean,
Ground Zero.
You know, I actually personally don't work on that project. I know my mother was meeting about it. My mother, Elizabeth Stribling, runs Stribling Marketing Associates. I know she was meeting about it today. So, I mean, from what I can tell, it looks fabulous, and it's coming along. And I think it's going to, I mean, from the projections and the renderings, it's going to be a really incredible project. It's just, there were a few hurdles at the beginning, obviously.
Yeah. I think it has a Starchitect name attached to it as well. Robert, you're doing stuff for A.B. Rosen. You're doing one project, which we just talked about for a second, but there's Chinese lenders on the project, and I think they're partnered with Venki. And also you're doing a project at on Park Avenue South that has a Chinese developer. Is that right? CL. And do they pitch in at all as far as giving you guidance for going after foreign buyers, or is that something that is like part of the marketing of the project?
What I would say is that we are seeing an increase in demand from Chinese towards the U.S. assets in general. And so whether that's not just individual investor assets or for their children, but for development as a whole. And I even see it at the corporate level with companies that I'm personally invested in. And so I think there is a flight to quality in light of volatility in China towards American larger assets overall. You asked earlier about how is our product differentiated. It's more pied-à-terre, relatively reasonably priced, and it's for the international businessman that does, or businesswoman that does not want to be in a hotel, right? So I think that's how we're differentiated on that row.
All right, so let's leave it there, and I want to thank our panelists for coming out today. Thanks so much, guys, and thanks everybody for coming out.